Awesome. Well, thank you everyone who's coming. Oh, we got one more person who's popping in here. Sergio, it has been forever since I have seen you. I'm so glad you're here.
I know.
We are getting started here. We've got Grady Kelly from Aptive Environmental. Grady and I work together. I am a contractor for them, and I help build all of their internal resources, online resources. And Grady is their UX manager, manages a team of designers and developers, all with the intent of improving the experience for their sales reps, their service pros, and whoever else might be using their tools so that things are easier, more efficient, and ultimately more successful for everyone involved. So I've asked Grady to share his wealth of knowledge and how he goes about UX. And yeah, I think that's it. Grady, anything you want to add to that? You're muted though.
Was muted. Nope. I'll just I'll share my screen and get started. Let's see. Not that one. This one. I'm ready. Can you guys see the screen there?
Yep.
Yes.
Great.
Sure can.
So first, I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming. Dustin, I kind of already did that, and thanks to Dustin for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I love talking about this stuff. I love doing UX design and chatting about it. As much as I work in it every day, you don't really have time to talk about the simple parts of it. You're always in the weeds with something, so I think we'll have lots of fun doing that. So just a little bit about myself. I've been doing UX in some form for the last 20 years or so. I've worked full-time at a number of places here in Utah, and I've also freelanced quite a bit. So I heard a couple of y'all mentioning doing some side gigs, and when my wife wants something new in the house, I tend to pick up a gig. But aside from that, I haven't had time since working at Aptive to be able to do that, which has been nice. But all this to say that I've worked in just about anything, everything from electronic medical record software to telecommunications software. Some of y'all may have heard of InVision. You can do prototypes with their software. I worked for them for a short time, even translation software. So all sorts of different things, and all those things have given me quite a bit of insight in how to do UX in different ways with different people, all trying to solve different problems. So my school credentials, I don't have any. I actually studied guitar at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia for a year, and then I studied guitar in Europe for a year. My dad got stationed over there. So everything you're seeing or hear me talk about is just sweat equity. I picked it all up as I went along. I remember hearing a long time ago, back before 3D printers were a big deal, the guys at Palm, if you guys remember Palm Pilots, they'd have their little phone, their devices, and what they would do is they'd carve these out of wood. So they would carve wood prototypes for form factor and how to test those things out. How does it feel in their hand, in their pocket, to do different things with the stylus. And when I first started doing UX design, I was reading about how they were doing that with industrial design. I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. I wonder how we can do those things. How can we create prototypes? How can we test those things and so on? So I haven't taken a test, or I haven't taken a test or been validated. But all I know is there was a gal from Full Sail University, if you've heard of them, some online university, called me up a while back, and she's like, look, you can get a degree with us in 2 years in product design, and you'll be making so much more money. How much money do you make now? And I told her, and it was way more than what I could make if I had done their university first. So I've done pretty well for myself, better than Full Sail could have done for me. The short of it is that I just love this type of work. and I do it all the time. I mean, I even find myself doing it at home. You know, if I think the living room's not laid out right, or you know, if we could do something more efficient, those types of things are user experience design to me. And um, I think improving the way we use the different tools that are in front of us, whether it's for work or home or play, I think we're all doing some form of user experience design. When I first got started in this, I kind of like this chart because there's just so much involved in what we call user experience. I mean, everything from visual design to information architecture. In fact, it used to be there was I have a domain name. I have uixd.com, and for me, it was like all the different U's, I's, and X's that had to do with design, because there's interaction design or information architecture, UI design, and those kind of all cover this discipline. The funny thing is you know, 15, 20 years ago, you could find individuals that had one or more of these skills or two, but not all of them, not a jack of all trades. I don't know if this is true anywhere else, but here in Utah, it's rare to find someone who doesn't know a lot or a little of a lot of these things. My team, I have three other designers. Most of them are pretty broad in this skill set. Some of us even know how to front end code, which is helpful. Even though we don't do it in our day-to-day projects here at Aptive, we are still using that knowledge to help make sure that the things we're designing can actually be built. Um, the one thing, cool thing too, I like about UX design is we take all these types of things and we're ultimately solving problems for real life people. And I like this little meme. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but you know, the mom and dad, they're loving the little baby, looking at the Noah's Ark, you know, thing above their head, and you know, the little kid, he's just a bunch of animal bums. That's all he sees. Which I just think is funny. We don't ever see it from that vantage point, right? We're just all looking at you know, from the side or from the top, never from the bottom. So I've always I think one of the best things you can do in UX, and even you know, in the field you guys do most of the time, is just be asking why all the time. And I think that Dustin does this quite a bit. Whenever we're working on a project, he'll say, okay, well, why this or why that? And sometimes I'm not infallible. He'll bring something up that I hadn't thought of. Um, I've told Dustin this story. I had a designer work for me where he was sent to work with someone in operations to figure out this problem that they'd have apparently for years. And I saw the gal who ran the team later in the day. She just looked really gruff, and I was like, "Oh, so how did it go?" You know, she's like, "Oh, great." I was like, "Well, it doesn't seem like it. You know what happened?" He goes, "Well, we got it figured out." I'm like, "Okay, well, I don't understand what's wrong." She's like, "Well, your guy, you know, when he came, he said, okay, tell me about what you need." And then I would tell him, and he's like, okay, well, why do you do it like that? And I would tell him, and he's like, well, why do you do that? And I would tell him, and there's all these whys after whys after whys. And eventually, the end result was there was nothing to do. They had actually already solved the problem. A few steps in, he realized, well, it looks like you're doing this here, but you're also doing this over here. And so he was able to get the bottom carousel advantage, I guess, or the side advantage, because he was able to see their problem from a different aspect and was able to solve their problem just from asking questions. No pixels needed to be pushed. Um, I'm going to illustrate most of this around how I got started in UX design before I even knew about UX design, and I think this will cover a lot of what I believe user experience design is really about, and how to go through that process. So back in, it was like 1995, I lived in Athens, Georgia. I worked for the Athens Daily News, the newspaper company. Some of you look like you're my age or so. You might remember newspapers. And yes, they used to take them and throw them at people's houses. And so I was a manager over about 8 or 10 carriers. And what would happen is I would have to run routes if they were sick or unable, or if they quit, and I had to run a route until it was full. And this was just a pain, mainly because the routes were printed on dot matrix printers, and you had all this metadata from these old IBM mainframe systems, and it would print these out, and it would say, the name of the person, what their address was, what their subscription was. Maybe it was a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Maybe it was 5 days, 7 day, or just the weekend, or just Sunday. I think there was 6 or 8 different permutations of subscriptions, and everything else was stored in the head of the carrier, because a lot of people had a specific place they wanted the paper. Maybe they wanted it, maybe they had a newspaper bin under their mailbox. Some of them wanted it in a certain box or under their mat, their welcome mat. And so if you were getting any of that information, it was straight from the carrier. But a lot of these people, they had run these routes, some of them for years, because this was my area was northeast Georgia, so a lot of rural area. It wasn't a lot of any part of Atlanta or even the west side of Athens, and so they knew these areas pretty well. But it would always come up. Someone would quit or get sick, and someone else would have to run a route, and we would always wait after routes were run. We would have to sit around and wait for phone calls because someone missed a spot or didn't get put in the right place, and we'd have to run a paper to them. So whenever updates needed to be made to these lists, you would think it would happen over the phone, but there was just too many. I mean, some of these routes had 400 to 600 people on a route, and so there was no way to go down. They weren't numbered, like I said. It was this. So these weren't numbered. You couldn't say, okay, number 5 is now weekend only, and oh wait, looks like there's another one. And they weren't always in the best route orders, like how you would throw it. So they would have to figure out how to throw the route themselves. So what they would do is they would show up in the office, and they would always be really, really angry. There was one guy, his name was George, and every time he would drive in, it would take him maybe 45 minutes to get to the office, and I'd hand him his printout, and he would sit there for hours because he was handwriting it down. Like, this is the order, this is the way I do it based on his route. And he would leave after 3 or 4 hours, and sometimes he'd shake my hand, or sometimes he'd just shout across the room and tell me he was leaving. He was never happy about the experience. So I just knew there had to be something better done here, because I didn't like it that all my carriers were coming in upset. I figured I was going to hedge on attrition. I didn't want these guys leaving, because some of these routes would take 4 or 5 hours to run. If I could make it so that they were happier and they would stay longer, then all the better. So I tried to noodle on this idea. What could be done? Now remember, this is like 1995. The internet's not super prevalent. People don't have email, because that was another thing. I couldn't email these changes. That wasn't a thing. So I went to Best Buy, and I got myself a Best Buy credit card, bought myself a printer, and I bought myself a little clipboard that had rings on it, and a big stack of 4x6 cards. And my thought was, if I could put all of this information on a card, I could put the name of the person, their address, what their subscription was, and then directions to the next place. And actually, I did this really quick for the slide, but it was actually on 2 cards. The back of one card had the way to go to the next stop, and the card below it would tell you, what you had to do at the place you were currently at. So it was really easy. And now, if you were going to go to run a route or change a route, it was really, I just had to print the 4 cards, and I would hand them to George, and that would be the end. It'd be really easy to update. So so my next thing, I wanted to test this out with George, and so I went and printed these all up, his route, and I put it all together, and I bundled it on this clipboard. And he's like, "How's it going, Grady?" And I was like, "Oh, George, here." He's like, "What is this?" This. He was expecting me to hand him, like I always did, the printout with all of the names. And I explained it to him. I was like, "Look at this, and this is how this works." And he just lit up, like he hadn't thought of this, anything like this ever. And here I was. Newspaper routes wasn't my jam. Like I said, I studied guitar for a while. Newspaper route optimization wasn't in my wheelhouse. but I'd come up with this way, and I wanted to see if it worked. And he said, "Grady, this is amazing. Like I would have thought of this, in 100 years." He goes, "So what do I do next? What happens next?" And I was like, "Oh, well, next time you come, I could just replace the cards. I just get, here's this, and you just move them. If someone cancels, just yank the card." And he was just all smiles, elated. So he's like, "Great, this is awesome." He gives me a hug and walks out the door. And so my boss, his name was Jim. So like I was in my 20s. I think he was probably in his 60s. He was an older guy. At least for me at the time, he was an older guy. And he's like, "Jim, what happened with George? Did he leave us? Like, why was he hugging you?" And I was like, "Oh, well, let me show you." And I showed him everything I'd done, and I should show him. There's Happy George. Um, I should have, I showed him how and explained this all to him. He's like, "I want to bring some people in here, and I want to talk about this." So we go into his office. I explain everything I did, and he had like, I think she was a director because he was like vice president of morning delivery or something like that. And so his director and I'm explaining this to them, and they're just blown away. Like, "You just did all this?" And it's like, "Well, sure. I just bought the printer, blah blah blah." And so they decide they want to pilot this with all of the morning news delivery. So they decide to go and hire a bunch of temps because, remember, again, this is 1995. There's no Zapier or anything like that to transfer this data from these IBM AIX systems to a Windows. I was using an Access database. There's no way to do that. So they hired like 40 people, and they're all sitting there transferring all this stuff of all the routes, and printed off these flip books for every carrier. I think there was maybe 40 because I was about 8 to 10, and I think there was about 4 or 5 of us. And they piloted it for a couple weeks, and they knew right away like this was going to change how Athens Daily News did all of their paper routes. Because what they ended up doing was the evening paper did the same thing. They ended up switching the whole thing. So this was really cool because it changed how the newspaper ultimately did business. Um, and it changed the user experience of not just the carriers, but also of people that managed carriers. And this all came about from asking a bunch of questions, testing assumptions, finding possible solutions, and then letting the business know that this was something we had done and how it was going to affect us for the better. And I thought it was pretty cool because I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, that's what user experience design was all about. But in a gist, that's pretty much how almost all the work I do is done. Um, Even with Dustin, in fact, it's the reason that I got Dustin involved working with Aptive was we had a system that I think we were paying $500,000 for that was used to communicate with the sales team. And this had a bunch of different things. It was um, sales news, sales training, recruiting information. So when these guys wanted to recruit other people, um, it was all just one hodgepodge app that was really expensive. And I got asked to sit in on a meeting with that team. It wasn't even part of the product team; it was part of something marketing was doing. And I got asked about, I was actually sitting there listening to them talk, and these marketing guys were like, "Yeah, it's really slow." And the gal in operations was like, "Well, how is it slow? What do you mean by that?" And they're like, "Well, when we upload the video, it takes almost a day, and then when they try and load it, it almost never loads." I said, "What kind of video are you uploading? Like, what are we talking about?" He's like, "Oh, it's like 2.5 gigs." Like 2.5 gig, and are you uploading this to YouTube? "Oh, no, no, this is right into their system. They have a backend that serves it up." I was like, okay, so they're probably trying to download a 2.5 gig file every time they open this video. I said that's why it's not playing. I also found out that they were using Sketch. This company had a plugin for Sketch and for Figma, and this is how you updated the whole thing. If you need to update content, you had to do it with this plugin and publish through the plugin. So it's very limited on who could use it. And then you had people who weren't learned enough to know there were better ways to do things. So I told the gallon operations is like, we need to get rid of this. This is horrible. Like, you guys should be able to do this on your own. We should be using modern day technology to serve up things like video. And so I switched everything over to WordPress. I pretty much recreated what they did in about a weekend. And we had that thing replaced. I think when I brought Dustin on, we were able to do something more public or polished. And within a short period of time, we had replaced all the tools that this one tool did for a fraction of the cost. And then they actually tried to come back at us and re-up their contract. And it was cool because a bunch of these executives, these VPs I'd worked with, all said, well, Grady pretty much recreated your whole tool in a weekend. Why would we spend $500,000? Why wouldn't we just give it to him? And I was like, yeah, why wouldn't you just give it to me? But it was a no-brainer. The tools were just so much more streamlined. People could update it whenever they needed to. There's several different audiences for these type of tools and different stakeholders, and they're all able to do it. And so that's pretty cool. In fact, I just realized I skipped over some of this, but here's just a handful of the tools that we've been able to build using WordPress and Divi. Everything from knowledge bases to learning management systems, a brand guide, the recruiting website. In fact, the coolest part, Dustin is kind of my secret weapon. We've had several times where people will come to me and say, hey, we need a calculator thing done for a certain website. And I'll say, okay, yeah, we can do that. And they're like, really? How long will it take? Like a couple weeks, a month? I was like, how about tomorrow? And they're just blown away by this idea that can be done tomorrow. And we did that this last weekend, and it was a recruiting thing for our sales team. And it was just a huge hit because they were able to use this calculator. They wanted to use a spreadsheet, a shared Google Sheet. And I told them right away this wouldn't work because you can't all use the spreadsheet at the same time. And these are sales bros. They're not the sharpest tools in the shed. And so once I told him, like, this is what we can do, he was like, oh, that sounds better. Let's do it. And now it's built up a lot of confidence in what product design can do for these teams because they realize that we're able to help them accomplish goals that they might have and even make it simpler than they may have imagined in the past. I want to apply this. I realize this is a lot, took me less time than I thought. So I want to run through another similar scenario because I'll be honest, I found this same recipe, and you've probably experienced some version of what I went through with problems that you've solved with design, and I think it's pretty much the same across the board. But some of them that have really affected change, at least I've seen in user behavior or in saving money for the company. Obviously, the last one I described saved a lot of money, but we had another. I worked for a company that made an app for a medical company that did lab work, and they were doing. I mean, it's a national, probably global company. They do hundreds of thousands of labs a day. The biggest problem is it took on average 18 to 25 minutes to put a lab into the system. Now, this was probably not as long ago. This is maybe 14 years ago. And so they're telling me, we don't even know how to solve this, Grady. We've tried, and nothing we do works. And I was like, okay, well, I'll go hang out with one of these people. And so I went to one of the labs and I asked if I could hang out with the lab tech for a couple of days and just get a sense of what they were doing. The first day, I didn't even ask questions. I just sat back and she would tell me, she's like, get ready, it's going to break here. And oh, get ready, this is horrible. And she'd curse a few times, slammed her keyboard a few times. It was really frustrating because she had certain expectations of the system and the system wasn't giving it to her. So the second day I started to ask questions. Why did you do this? What did you expect when this happened? What would you like to see in this case? What are some other problems that happen in these scenarios? And it gave me a whole lot of info. Now, the end result of this was really cool because I have this front end development capability. I rebuilt a whole working prototype of her of the system in HTML with some JavaScript to do some of these interactive things. And I should have mentioned the process was about 12 screens of data, so they can go through 12 screens of forms, and at the very end, when they would hit submit, all of the errors would come up in a JavaScript alert box. So it wasn't even something you could copy paste. You had to print the screen and then hold the paper and then go back and make all the adjustments and cross fingers when you hit submit again that you'd solved them all. So I went and made this prototype, and as we go through the various things, I told her, okay, now click here and do this. Now it looked exactly like what she had been using to a degree. Um, Things were in the right place. You know, her expectations were very similar. And so I asked her to walk me through it. You know, when you're clicking here, what are you expecting? And she's like, well, nothing. Okay. So she types in a number. It's supposed to be a Medicaid number. And when she entered it and went to the next field, a little warning came up. Hey, this is missing 2 digits. It's supposed to be a 16-digit number, not a 14-digit number. And her eyes just lit up. This possibility of being able to inform her in real time of the errors that were happening in the form, that was like magic. And so we go through and she sees we took this 12-page form, we reduced it to like 3 or 4 pages. And at the end, when you hit submit, everything was good. You knew it was good because we had warned you of all the errors before you even got there. And so she was so elated that this was a possibility. She didn't hug me. She grabbed me by the cheek and just saying how happy she was that this could solve her problems. And asked how long would this take to do? I was like, well, we had to work with the dev team to figure that part out, but we knew that we had a solution. We iterated it a few more times with her, and until we knew we had all the different scenarios within these forms. A couple months later, we had enacted almost all of those changes. So we took that 15 or 18 to 25 minute time to input a form or input a lab, and we took it down to 5 to 8 minutes. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of hours of time spent, millions of dollars in money saved. You know, it being quicker to get a lab input in the system and then processed through. Those were all things that just saved millions of dollars over time. And so to me, that's the really cool part about user experience design, is that you can make changes like that that really have high impact in the company you're working for, or if it's side work. So all those were full-time gigs for me. I did have one that was a side gig that had similar outcomes. So I don't know how many of you have done Ancestry DNA kits before, but those kits, they come in a little box, like this size, and you put them in and just put it in the box. The problem that they had was this would all get sent to a warehouse and would get sorted. And these were, what's the PC way to say it? They were hourly workers, but they were non-English speaking hourly workers. It was almost like they could either be picking strawberries if you live in California, or they could be working in the warehouse sorting DNA kits. They weren't highly skilled, and it was questionable whether or not they had documentation. But they so they had all sorts of errors because not everything was in Spanish, right? They were only Spanish. They didn't speak any English. And I found that out later. Most of that came from the product managers I was working with. But they needed the system to be easy to learn because it took them about a week to train. And then because of the type of workers these were, sometimes they would just leave on a dime. They didn't even know they were leaving. So they needed that to be fixed. They needed to be intuitive and easy to understand. And they also worked in this loud warehouse, so they wanted to accommodate that and see if we could do that somehow. So I actually went to the warehouse, and the product guys, they were pretty new at Ancestry DNA at the time, and we go down there, and the warehouse dude spoke Spanish, but very little. I happened to I served a mission for my church for 2 years, and so I'm fluent in Spanish. And so I was like, I want to go talk to these guys, and they're like, oh, you won't be able to understand you. I was like, está bien. And so I go over there and talk to them. They were just all happy to speak to me. And especially they knew that the Jefe over here couldn't even speak Spanish. So they were telling me about all the problems they had. Oh, this doesn't ever work. We don't ever know what this means. This is in English, but it's not even written right in English, we don't think. And, the feedback's not in Spanish. That would be great. And, I was able to get a plethora of feedback from them. So I go back to Ancestry DNA. We do some screens, then I show it to the product manager and the engineering manager. And he says, well, this is great, but we don't have a front end guy for this. I was like, what do you mean? This is Ancestry. I know you guys got lots of money. And he's like, well, this is this warehouse team. Like, nobody cares about us. I was like, okay, well, I can build it. Like, I can do this, no problem. He's like, what? You're just the designer. How can you do this? I said, don't worry. I'll get it taken care of. So it was like a long weekend. This is on a Friday. So Tuesday we get back together, and I get this whole thing made. And he thinks he's looking at an Envision prototype. But it wasn't. I was using Semantic UI. It was a framework, a UI framework like Bootstrap. And so I was using that already in my head and in my designs in Sketch. So that's what I built with. And so he's like, well, this is just a prototype. This isn't the same thing. I was like, and I showed him how it was clickable and there was code, and he was blown away. He said, Grady, we're supposed to have this delivered by November. I get the feeling if you're doing this, because Christmas time is a big time for them, because they're always on sale. I think you've probably advanced our delivery date by months if you can do this quickly. And it's like, oh, absolutely, like we can totally do it. And so the process from then on was we would make some assumptions based on whatever the task was, and then I would just go down to the warehouse and show the workers there how this worked. And they would give us feedback, and we were able to make adjustments in real time because I wasn't using Sketch anymore. I was basically designing in code, and they were super happy. We were also able to test things like we wanted to make a sound when they scanned, because I don't have anything here that looks like this, but oh, maybe this will work. So this is a stand for my headphones, but they basically had their scanner sitting on top of an arm like this, and they would just put it under the scanner, and they would hear a sound, but it was always the same sound. So what we did was we made it so if they scanned it and there was an error, it would make this a couple of times, and it would really get your attention. And the screen would turn red, and they would see there was something up, because this was another problem. They were pretty far back from the screen, and so they had to always move in. There was a table between them, but we were going to make it so the screen was optimized for being that distance away and be able to tell them more information. So the screen turns red, it immediately catches their peripheral, and they look up, oh, this is a problem, because they've also heard the sound. So we were able to make sure that it was audible enough, even in this loud warehouse, for them to catch. And then we made, based on these color codes, they could see what to do and put things in the appropriate bins. So I had that gig for about a year, and we did this repeat on and off for all that time. Shipped and even made some more adjustments to the tool. The cool thing about this was, and I would suggest, I didn't start, I should have done this way sooner in my career, but if you're able to measure the impact that you have, like the last few examples, it was really easy to do with time or money, or even happiness with the newspaper example. But with this one, what I didn't know, Ancestry had done a study, and they went to see how long things took, what were the problems they were trying to solve for. I didn't know this study existed. And so I found out later from the product manager, they did a postmortem, and they did another study. And they were able to tell me that we hit all those goals, those initial goals of, it used to take a week to teach people the system. Now it takes 2 hours. It used to be that we would have 8% error rate. Now it's less than 0.5%. And even those errors were errors with the order. It wasn't errors, user error in the sorting station. They were able to ramp up people quickly during high peak times whenever they would, let's say, slash the price in half. Because usually those kits are like 100, 120 bucks. So if you ever got them for 30 or $40, they would always get more of them coming in. So now they were able to train and ramp things up in the sorting center on a dime, because it was really quick to do. So as far as Ancestry was concerned, it was a huge success. And so I've started doing that now lately. If I'm ever working on a thing, for instance, the calculator I mentioned earlier, we just happened, Dustin and I, to be working on a different calculator to help motivate sales reps during the sales season, because a lot of times they get down about not doing as well as they could. So we wanted to be able to show them if they tweaked a few little metrics that they could have control over, like number of doors they knocked, or if they sold at a higher price, they could change their average contract value, that it would turn into a lot more commission for them. So that's something that's measurable. If I can say I can take a sales rep that normally sells 100,000 in revenue and turn them into a $250,000 rep, I mean, that's a huge deal. Let's see, relates to website development. Sure. So I think all these are about. So I appreciate this question because apps are certainly different than websites. But I think you can do the same general things. I think you can find out, from someone, what are the goals of a website. So I did this before with, it's going to sound like a strange thing to do a website for. So there was a guy that had a product that would turn any toilet paper into a wet wipe. So you didn't have to buy wet wipes for the bathroom that clog up sanitation pipes and things like that. You had this little dispenser, and it would turn your toilet paper into a wet wipe. And I thought, okay, great. And he actually showed me this gigantic like ball of wet wipes that clog up sewage things, and it was really horrible. But it's apparently a huge problem. And so I asked him, well, what is it you're trying to solve with the website? He's like, well, I want to be able to make sure that, people understand what this problem is. I want to make sure that people can order quickly. I want to make sure that, if people are running out, there's someone we can know and make it easier for you to purchase more of the product. And so I knew what those user goals were, and so we were able to design around those goals. So the landing page, I only got as far as a landing page with him, but we were able to show, like, look, this is how you can show how this works. You can show the problem at the same time, because that was the big thing, was most people, don't care about it unless you make it personal for them. And so we had to try and figure out ways to do that. So I still think that's user experience. Even though it's not a task someone does all the time, you can even say, as much as Twitter or Instagram are not applications that you do work in, there's still an experience to be had there. Even Google Meet is an app, but it's simple enough that you want to make those interactions and visualizations easy to understand and know what to do without having to think. A lot of people just don't want to think. They just want to do whatever it is they're doing.
I
I don't
would
know if that answers
also
the question.
probably
Go
just
ahead, Dustin.
so to add to what you're saying, Grady, and to answer Chris's question, how it relates to websites. I think what Grady's illustrated so far is that UX can be really big or really small in its impact. And what we do for UX is going to largely depend on the pain points of the stakeholder. So looking back at those screens that Grady had of the different websites that him and I have worked on together, with the brand guide, the pain point was the brand guidelines were changing so often that the marketing department couldn't get those changes out to the whole company in an efficient fashion. So we took this huge PDF that's like 30 pages long and put it on a website. And now the brand team manages that website, and they make all the changes they want and can make styles that way. There was another website we did. Actually, there's a couple of them where to train sales reps or service pros, for them to go find the training is a beast. And so we created a website that is organized, it's simplified. We're actually going to transition it into an LMS platform for even better user experience, but we create a solution in the interim where they can go to one place and find all their training in an organized fashion. That same website, the feedback came back from the sales reps, and they're like, I don't understand what is a link and what isn't. And so we took that feedback and created better user experience by underlining anything that they could click on. And so with user experience, as you're working with your clients or your company and making these improvements, it's asking the questions and it's asking for feedback. Because we can spend all day building a solution, while it might be intuitive to us who knows what a link is and what isn't, because the cursor changes, some people, they just don't get it. But they're the ones who are using it, and they're the ones that we have to cater to. And so I didn't agree underlining every link, but we did it and they were happy, right? And so I think that's, how does it relate to websites? Well, it's what are the pain points? How can we use the tools that are available to us? You know, WordPress combined with Divi, Divi extensions. You know, what is that? Is a perfect plugin combination. You know, and it's just going to largely depend on who you're talking to and who's using it that will define that entire solution. But then once you implement it, you know, get additional feedback, you know, revise any changes, keep making changes, you're going to have a product, a solution that works. It's going to convert. And in Aptive's case, we're trying to increase training with all our sales reps. One, so they're efficient at the door. Two, so they stay all summer long, right? We don't want sales reps that are dropping out halfway the summer because they feel like they're not cutting it, they're not good enough. But if they just go through the training, they would be better than they are. And so those are just solutions we're trying to implement as quick as we can. But now the season's over, so we're, you know, we got all winter long to put something together to really crush it next year. So that's in my opinion, that's UX as it applies to websites, but it's really everything in life. You know, there's things that we do over and over, repetitive processes over and over that can be better, can be more efficient. And I think we do it subconsciously. But definitely asking the questions to whoever's using it can, it's weight in gold, the feedback you can get. So
Dustin's allowed me to, I'm remembering something I know I told you before, Dustin, about Kaizen. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this term, but after World War II, we sent a guy named Deming, he's Alexander Deming, who's an economist, to Japan, and we wanted to fix their economy and help them be better. And so Kaizen, if you're familiar with Six Sigma, it means constant improvement is what it means. And so Toyota was one of the first guys to use this idea of constant improvement in everything they did. One of the things that they do, and they still do today, is if anyone has a problem, they can go put it in a bin. You know, here's an idea box. And the first year they did this, they put like 95% of their opinions in action in the products and even in the construction line as they're building vehicles. In fact, you could actually stop all building on a conveyor belt if you saw a problem and you were rewarded. Most places you'd think, oh my gosh, we weren't able to build like 100 cars. It didn't matter. The pain of leaving a problem like that and shipping cars out with a problem was far worse than it was to nip it where it was found. So this idea of constant improvement is so ingrained now in Japanese culture that they ask each other, hey, what's the Kaizen of your family relationships? What's the Kaizen of your tennis game? So we can ask ourselves, you know, what's the Kaizen of, you know, our websites, our apps, or our process for finding these problems? And I think it's one that you could literally ask every day, and you'd probably find some way to improve what it is you're doing, you know, design-wise, or interacting with customers, or finding solutions to problems you're trying to solve. I think it's a simple way to do it.
sweet. I need to get a screenshot of our group here really quick. So Grady, if you could stop sharing your screen, and then we can jump into some questions if anyone has it. that would be awesome. So let me fire up my screenshot tool here. All right, guys, you're all looking great. On the count of 3, give me your smiles. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Cool. Thanks for indulging with that. That's for the Elegant Themes blog. Yeah, what questions do you guys have for Grady or me about UX design? Any?
Yeah, I
We
have
answered
several
them all.
questions.
That's awesome.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Grady. I loved your sense of humor in the presentation. It's delightful. And the examples are wonderful in terms of how just common sense, but oftentimes when you're in it, you don't see it. So, but
Right.
just really.
Oh, good. It's not just me. We
Yeah.
lost you, Catherine.
Can't hear you, Catherine. You cut out.
Oh,
You're on
muted.
mute.
Okay. I don't know how that happened. Thank you. Okay. Did you catch any of that?
No.
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 So I said, thank you so much for your humor. It was,
Sure.
I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the examples of how you were able to so simply streamline solutions. And so I always remember a saying, it's like, keep it simple, simple is the best, right?
Sure. Right.
But in my mind, so I'm designing my own websites, and I've done it in the past, and they're very old and they need to be updated. So what are some of the common issues that you see in websites that are kind of the low-hanging fruit that would make a difference in user experience? Like if you were to say the top 3 that you come across as you go through maybe it's just you're surfing the internet.
Oh, sure. So one of the pieces of feedback I give often, and Dustin saw this with one of these education sites we did, when the marketing guys, they actually designed the initial project, and they were thinking about it like marketing designers would. So there's this gigantic hero image, someone sitting in a book or something, right? And every time I saw it, I was like, this is worthless, because now I have to scroll, and well, I don't even know what the thing is to do. It has some meme or some phrase on there. And I kept telling you, got to get rid of that, because I come here and I'm like, okay, pretty picture. It's probably going to be there every time I come to this website. The person coming here got assigned something. They want to get the job. They want to learn what they're supposed to learn, pass a test, and then get back to work. So what I like to see is if I'm coming to a website and I know that like my own portfolio, I know people want to see what type of work I do, or what type of work I've done in the past and what services I offer. I would put those to the forefront. There's a gal, her name is Sarah Doody. I think it's Dooty. She's here in Salt Lake, actually. I think she's a transplant from somewhere else, but she has a whole boot camp on how to make your portfolio really great. So I did a lot of the things, even though I'd done this forever, I hadn't really thought about most of the work I get from word of mouth, and a lot of the things she suggested I thought were really awesome, like showcasing who I've done work for, or showing myself work. So there's a picture of me like drawing on a whiteboard or something that I posed for, but it makes you more, I don't want to say likable, but more human. Like you're not just an avatar, hi, I'm Grady or whatever. It seems a little bit more personal. Oh, wow, this guy does work. Oh, look, this is the type of stuff he does. And then it makes you want to dig in more. So I would say try and figure out what are those top 3 jobs to be done that you want someone to do when they come to your website, and then construct your designs based on those assumptions. And then you can always test them. I don't know if Dustin, people in the group
that's
hang
brilliant.
out, or you have a Discord or
I
something.
don't want to run too quickly over what you just said. It's like the top
Sure.
3 things that you want your customer to do. I think that
Right.
that's what drives people to put that big hero section in there, because the top thing that they want, but that's not the top thing the client, the consumer wants.
Right.
They want to vet you first. And
Right.
so I really appreciate that. That's brilliant, because you see a lot of the websites that are put out there as examples, they have these huge hero sections, and you're exactly right. It doesn't. It looks like a sales pitch. I might as well open a magazine and see a magazine. Right.
Right.
Brilliant.
Right.
Thank you.
Exactly right.
That's terrific.
Chris? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, coming from an ad background, print ad background, you know, that's a carryover from, you've got like less than 3 nanoseconds to catch somebody's attention. And for example, I do a lot of psychology websites. That's one of my niches, and I do investment firm sites. And for example, we have an investment firm not too far from here, Financial Advisors. They specialize in recently divorced women, middle-aged, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, you know, earning incomes of $250,000 and up. And so we did some serious focus group on what our hero image should be. Same thing, I did and this is basically so people can identify. I had a doctor's practice in downtown Chicago, actually Lincoln Park, which is another upscale demographic area, and they wanted to attract women, multi-ethnicity women, upwardly mobile, 24 through 39, who were looking for concierge. So we actually spent a lot of time. The thing we don't do though is take up the whole damn frickin' screen with the image, you know, because once you know, the human mind picks up an image instantly, and you're already basing that image and cross-referencing with your past experiences. That's how the psyche works. That's how the amygdala works, you know? But you need to give some content. You need to give some affirmation of, this is what we do, and yes, you're in the right place, and you've got like less than a second to do that, which is why you always got to give them a peek, you know? Like I'm looking, Catherine, I'm looking at your website, and what's really cool is I'm actually redoing it. I'm building somebody a new website who also did their website in iWeb, and I see you got a bunch of different websites.
Yes, all of iWeb, that old.
I love iWeb. It was awesome, you know, back in its day. And what's really cool about your website when it loads on a phone, because it is not responsive, you actually get a whole bunch of cool stuff going on. Let me see if I can get this into, at any rate. And these are actually all her different web properties, all different websites, you know, which my suggestion would be, you know, those are actually tabs on, those are selections on your primary nav. I'll close with my greatest tool for user experience is I build a new website. I take my phone over to my mom's house. She's 85 years old. I hand it to her with a web page open, and I watch what she does. Because if my 85-year-old mom can't get through the website to where I need her to go, if I can't get her through the sales funnel, I got to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, I did work for a company. They were trying to do home automation in elderly living facilities. So they wanted to be able to, you could do most of this now. This is maybe 8 years or so ago. And so I went and tested. My wife's parents are older than my parents, and so I would bring it to them and put this big old prototype up on the TV, because that was going to be the hub. So it was real life, like this is how this would work. And we were able to get really good feedback from them. We're also showing my kids who are, I mean, they're fairly internet savvy, but just having that perspective, that different mental model is what we call it, used a lot in UX. Like you could have the sales bros here at Aptive are a totally different beast than any of the engineers and than the gals who run sales operations. They're all different, and they all have different end games with the work that we provide them. So some of them might think, oh, this is dumb because of this, and others are like, this is stupid because of this, but it solves every problem the sales bro has, and because it makes complete sense to them. So we also used to do, I don't do this anymore, but we used to have people do design challenges if I couldn't figure out their capability in the interview. And so we used to do UTA, which is the Utah's transportation hub. They to buy tickets for the tracks is horrible. So we'd always ask people to redesign it. And I would always hire the person who told me they went to the tracks and asked people, what do you think of this design? Because they just went through it, right? Or they would stand and watch. One guy said, I actually asked, can I watch you buy your ticket? Can you tell me what you hate about this? And he gave the most, the greatest feedback, and he was able to provide the best solution, because he wasn't just using his own experience. Because sometimes, just like the gal at the lab place, she'd been doing the same crappy experience so often, she didn't care anymore, right? It's just, this is how it works. And so sometimes when you're showing solutions, I think other people, and especially people that have different mental models of how the world works or how the web works, you're going to get really good feedback.
I got a question for you. So what are some of the things, like if you were to talk to somebody who like wants to get into UX UI or just kind of expand that part of their skill set, like what are the things you need to know? Like I know you talked about, like you talked about coding and, you know, semantic and just some other platforms. But if you were to talk to someone and say, go like for example, I'm a designer. I do graphic design, advertising, other stuff, but what would I need to know? What's that first step to getting in to be able to kind of like check that as a box that I'm proficient in UX UI?
Right. So it's funny. So there's a guy here in the office. Some of his kids are trying to figure out what they want to do, and one wants to do development, and the other wants to do UX. And so I just kind of went through this with him. There's several online things you can do that are better than. I wouldn't go to a boot camp for anything. Everyone I've ever interviewed out of a boot camp has just been worthless. The ones that were good had previous experience. Like I know a guy who's one of the best engineers I've ever worked with. There's a place here, Newmont University. They have a 2-year program, so it's kind of like a boot camp. But he had previous coding. He came out of there a rock star. But I've worked with other people from Newmont, and it was just, my 5-year-old could have probably coded better than they could because it was just so hard. They didn't even understand concepts, and he had a good base. So it sounds like you have a good base with the current work you're doing. So what I would do, there's a company called Norman Nielsen Group. I think it's nng.com. They have some really great UX themed curriculum. They're kind of pricey. They do a couple times a year virtual conferences where you can take a class a day, and it might be, you might pay $800 for a full day class. But that certification is pretty respected. If you've done their work, it's pretty great. There was another one, I'm not going to be able to remember off the top of my head. It's got a weirder name. But aside from, like, if you wanted another designer to respect that you had some street cred, I think that would help. The stuff you'll learn will be, extremely useful. The other person to read, Jared Spool, he has a company called User Interface Engineering. It's uie.com. And they have a thing called All You Can Learn. I think it's aycl.uie.com. And for $25, you get access a month. You get access to all of their stuff. And I've actually done work with Jared and gone to their conferences and helped out. So like I was a runner and helped do some things. You could go for free if you help the conference. And there's always great stuff you can learn there. Now, as far as saying that you're a UX designer, what I would do, and what I've told a lot of people in your situation is I would come up with some projects on your own. In fact, I tell this to all the boot campers too, because there's this been debate on LinkedIn. I'll frequently see someone say, hey, no one thinks my coursework from my boot camp is real work. And they're like, of course, it was a homework assignment. That's not real work. You were told to make this interface. But what I would do is come up with something that you get easy feedback on. So let's say a to-do list app, a calendar app, a mail app. I made one time, I was trying to teach myself to code at the same time with Dreamweaver and some WYSIWYG code, but I built a Rolodex, if you know what a Rolodex, it's a contacts app. I actually had Rolodex.com, but I spelled it DECKS instead of DEX. But I made it do all these cool things. But what I did was I built that thing, and then I went and showed it to some people. What did you think about this? What would you change? And then one of the big things a lot of these Zoomer UX people do is case studies. They'll document what that process was. So you might come in and say, I just thought to-do lists suck, and I thought it'd be really cool if I had a to-do list that did these things. And I went and talked to my 5 buddies, and they told me these would be cool too. So I made, I don't know how to come up with a name. Oh, I have docosas.com, like do thing. It's cosas is in Spanish, so I kind of melded them together. So I made docosas, or I have another one. I have doitdammit.com. So I made Do It Damn It to help motivate me to get my stuff done, right? and then go through the whole process of, I made this prototype, or you made sketches. Now, I'll tell you, there's a lot of people that are proponents of sketching. It just depends, right? I worked with a guy once that sketched all the time in the office, and my boss, he'd always give me crap. He's like, look, Neil over here is doing wireframes. Like, so what? He takes 3 times longer to get it done. Like, I get it done. But however, whatever it takes to get out of your head to get to paper or whiteboard, I think whatever it takes. So if you do those things, I would put that in your, a lot of people use Medium. Like, so if you go to medium.com and search UX case studies, you'll find a ton of them. But then I'd say, here was my design. You know what? I showed my buddies, and they thought this was dumb, and they thought this was cool, and so I rejiggered it, and here's what I came up with. And then I think showing that process. So when I interview for UX designers, and I've interviewed a few that came from a marketing background and switched to UX. The number, well, there's 3 things I look for. The first one is if they're not BSing me or not, because let's face it, if you know words, the terms, you can BS your way through anything. The second is if they have the design chops, and I can learn that through a portfolio. But the biggest thing for me is the process. If they can tell me these are the steps I went through, I got this feedback, I made this adjustment. You know, this guy got really mad because I didn't understand. I took the time to understand, and we figured out what the problem really was, and this is how we solved it. I think that's the most important thing you can communicate in something like a case study. Eventually what will happen is you'll just be able to show a portfolio and talk it out, and you're like, well, you're hired. And I've had that happen a few times where I could just tell. I had another guy, though, fooled me enough, and my other 2 designers picked up on some things I didn't pick up on, and I was like, oh, this guy was totally scamming me. And I don't know if I wasn't paying enough attention that day or what, but he ended up not being all the things he said. And we found out later, I actually did it backwards is the reason. I'm remembering this now. I had talked to him first before I looked at his work. And then when we were all looking at his work, we're like, this doesn't seem right. He said he did all this stuff. And then when I called him out on it later, he had different answers. But I would say do that. And that's easy to do, and show your friends or whatever, get that feedback. And I would even document the feedback, you know, in the case study. You know, I showed it to this person, and give them some sort of what's the right word? Like, I know there's a good word for this, but like, say like they're a Caucasian male, age 20 to 30, lives in the city, sort of like a persona, but not really a persona, but some demographic. That's what I was looking for. Some demographic. There's another word for the ethno something. I can't remember. Anyhow, there's a whole field of study of people that just do that. You know, they just study people and their interactions with things. So I would say, here's this, and this is what I found out from them. Or because you might find maybe your to-do list is really great for, you know, someone who does tech, but when you showed it to someone who's a stay-at-home mom, not so much. You know, or when you show it to someone that does Uber and DoorDash type work, it worked really well for them when you were able to hone in on what the best features were of your app. I think that's an excellent way to do it. Now, I'll also be honest and tell you, I've never seen anyone take me up on that at all. Like, I give that information, and I just see a sulk, because and most of this was from boot campers, so I think they're like, oh, I spent 12 grand on this, or my dad gave me all this money to pay for this boot camp. I went back there was one guy I actually saw months later, and I asked him if he ever got the job. It was like at Costco or something. And he's like, oh, well, I'm still working at the ophthalmologist office. He was a clerk. He worked the front desk at the ophthalmologist. I was like, well, didn't you do any of those things? He's like, it just wasn't in him. So like, he got sold the dream of being a UX designer from these boot campers, and it was just too much for him. He didn't have it in him. But
yeah,
I think
that's good. That's really good feedback. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's crazy what you can do and what you can learn with a few $100 and some courses and some, you know, a few websites. Like, it's crazy the information's out there. So
yeah.
And I like the feedback of, you know, doing a case study and documenting it and talk about, you know, how you did it in your thought process. It's very similar to design. I'm a self-taught designer, and you know, that's that when you're talking to clients, you know, they want to hear your thought process. That's one of the things that sells the designs. Anyway, I like it. It's good. Thank you.
You know,
you're welcome.
It was really awesome that you brought up Kaizen. I worked for an electronics manufacturer, microphone manufacturer in the late 80s and early 90s. like before the internet, like we were still using Microsoft 3X. But at any rate, I think what makes really successful web folks, you know, anybody who's working with technology successful in the long run is that they do continue to learn. I mean, one of the guiding principles of Kaizen actually comes from Buddhism, which is change is inevitable. And you need to be accepting of that. And if you're not, then you're going to get rolled over, you know. And like your examples there of, you know, the resistance to change, you know, why would I have to do that? I've already done that. So it's like, well, do it again, man.
Right.
And you get better at it,
Right.
period, you know.
Right.
And then what I really like about your background, Grady, I used to deliver newspapers here in Barrington, Illinois,
Oh, yeah?
when I was a young guy.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, I mean, it's a process. You know, everything in life is a process, and you can break it down into steps.
Yeah.
You know, you can get it flowing like a reed in the river, or you can be a rock in the river and get, you know, worn down. So you actually opened up my eyes to a couple of different things today, which is helpful because, you know,
Cool.
I can get stuck in my comfort zone, and that's a dangerous place for me to stay, man, because then I can lose my curiosity, I lose my competitiveness, and we know that where that is.
Right.
So you know, you don't take those two things to the bank, man.
Right.
Thanks for your presentation today, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Cool.
Yeah. Thanks, Grady. I appreciate the
thanks,
time
Dustin.
and effort putting this
No,
together.
anytime.
I love your stories. I think they're real world applicable, and I love UX. I love improving things and solving problems through just better solutions for people who use it. And so, yeah, this is awesome. And Catherine, Mike, Chris, thank you for coming. Without you guys here, we would have no meetup. So I appreciate the time you guys have taken to be here and to listen to Grady, and just it means a lot to me.
The
Thanks for organizing
the
it.
lunchtime thing was kind of cool, as opposed to
Which
like
thing?
the lunch hour was very cool.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
Instead of at night, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Life for me happens at night, and it's hard to do these meetups. So, so yeah, lunchtime is a little easier for sure.
Cool.
But
Grady, do we have your contact info? I assume just in case we ever want to shoot you a question or something, or.
Yeah, so it's just my name. So Grady at GradyKelly.com is my email. My Twitter, all that stuff's just Grady Kelly. Oddly enough, there are 4 other Grady Kellys out there, and they're all ticked at me for having these things first. Like I have Grady Kelly at Gmail.
Nice.
There's some kid in Texas. He's like 20 something. He's like, man, you get all these first. Like I have the Snapchat, even though I don't use Snapchat. I don't want another Grady Kelly out there using Snapchat, posting pictures. But a lot of them use the Gmail default for their own emails. So like one of them is a guy who works for MTV, and he goes to get suntanning all the time. And so he'll say, oh, my email is GradyKelly at Gmail. So now I'm getting his receipts. Like I'm not getting the bill, but I'm getting receipts. He goes a lot, like 4 or 5 times a month. There's another one in New York. He goes, I can't remember what. Oh, I got some airline tickets once. The really good one was I got one. It was a phone bill for AT&T. And I was like, this is not me. I go look, and I realized because they use my email, my Gmail, I could log into their account. So I changed the password, I log in, and then I find out what the number was because I didn't know what the phone number. And so I used a Google voice number, and I messaged them. I was like, hey, is this Grady? And they're like, yeah. Who's this? I said, this is Grady. They're like, what? I was like, you're using my email, sucker. And I told him to switch it. And then you know what? He didn't switch it. So I use his free HBO Go account all the time because I can just log into the account because he gets it free with his AT&T.
Wow, that's hilarious.
But all the other stuff is me. So if on Twitter, I'm at Grady Kelly. On the Facebook, on LinkedIn, I'm also Grady Kelly. But Grady at GradyKelly.com is my email, and I'm pretty open to answering and responding all that stuff.
Cool.
So feel free to reach
Thank
out.
you.
I'm totally cool with that.
Nice. Thank you.
Thanks for the time, everyone.
Yes. Thanks for coming. And yeah, we'll see you next month. Hope you guys can come.
Okay.
Cool.
Thanks. See ya.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.